Bahrain was more convincing than Japan and gave us an interesting race. The analysis of the race pace from the top teams confirms that McLaren is still superior, but the others are not standing still. Oscar Piastri appeared untouchable for everyone. The average gap in race pace compared to Lando Norris is significant, around 0.4 per lap. The gap from McLaren to Mercedes and Ferrari is about half a second, while the gap to Red Bull is almost a second per lap. The Bahrain Grand Prix turned out to be a fertile ground for McLaren, which, thanks to a stable rear end and excellent traction, adapted perfectly to the characteristics of the track. Ferrari tried right up to the end to reach the podium with the tools currently at its disposal, with Charles Leclerc continuing to give his all. There was also a small show of pride from Lewis Hamilton, who finished only 5th but showed glimpses of pace during the second stint. The Maranello team delivered its best race of the 2025 Formula One season. Of course, that didn't take much, considering the disastrous Sundays at the start of the new championship, although a small sign of progress had been seen in the Japanese Grand Prix. The updated floor might have helped in that regard, though only by a few hundredths of a second. At least, that was the warning given by team principal Frederic Vasseur after the race. The safety car disrupted the team's plans, especially Ferrari's, which opted for a strategy different from the other top teams. Unlike their rivals who started with soft tires, Ferrari chose to start with medium tires, aiming for a single stop and then finishing the race with hard tires. It was a Grand Prix in which Ferrari took a risk, trying something different with Tyre Strategy. Both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton started on new medium tires, while all others were on used softs. This difference placed the Monegasque driver at a clear disadvantage at the start, as he was overtaken by both George Russell and Lando Norris. The latter made a powerful start, aided by an incorrect grid position, which earned him a 5-second penalty that was served at the first pit stop. In the first stint, McLaren confirmed its speed, although Lando Norris was busy making up places after starting in 6th. Mercedes showed extreme consistency, with George Russell being the fastest after Oscar Piastri, while Antonelli couldn't match his teammates' pace. Max Verstappen was out of contention from Friday. The RB21 proved difficult to manage, and the team also made mistakes in the pits. Ferrari's race pace wasn't impressive. Hamilton struggled, while Leclerc held on to 4th until his pit stop. The first driver to stop was Lando Norris on lap 10, followed by George Russell on lap 13, and Oscar Piastri on lap 14. Charles Leclerc, on medium tires, extended his stint but only stopped 3 laps after Oscar Piastri, who was on softs. The second stint proved crucial. Ferrari mounted a new set of mediums, being the fastest on track, but this forced them to stop again. Max Verstappen, who had switched to hard tires on lap 10, showed weak pace on the harder compound, pushing Ferrari to rethink its strategy and abandon the idea of a single pit stop. With fresher tires, Ferrari showed good pace, climbing up the standings with both drivers. The second stint was very encouraging for Lewis Hamilton. The driver managed to recover 5 positions on track, thanks to a car feel that he described as having changed overnight compared to the first stint. However, a safety car on lap 32 interrupted the stint and overturned the strategy, forcing everyone into another pit stop. In the final stint, teams opted for different strategies. Both McLaren drivers mounted the medium tires. George Russell took a risk with softs, while the 2 Ferrari SF25 cars went for hards. Ferrari's choice seemed logical, unable to mount the mediums again due to regulations, and fearing soft tire degradation, the hard tire was the only viable option. However, the disadvantage of the tire compound was clear, and Ferrari struggled to maintain pace. Charles Leclerc was then 3rd behind Oscar Piastri and George Russell, but ahead of Lando Norris. He did everything possible to hold the position against the Briton, who ultimately prevailed a few laps from the end, after what was still a fine defensive effort by Ferrari's number 16. But there was little he could do against McLaren's superior performance and Lando Norris's fresher, more effective tires, as the current championship leader had the edge. Just like at the Suzuka circuit in Japan, Ferrari gave everything, but it still wasn't enough. Oscar Piastri remained untouchable, while George Russell managed the soft tire perfectly with a fast and consistent race pace. Norris in 4th passed Charles Leclerc at the end of the race, with the latter unable to defend against the McLaren on medium tires. After passing Charles Leclerc, the Briton tried to challenge George Russell, but the high downforce setup of the MCL39 hurt him on the straights, forcing him to settle for 3rd. The gaps at the end of the race were influenced by the safety car, so the gap between McLaren and the others would have definitely been larger. This doesn't take away from a strong Mercedes and a recovering Ferrari, which had its best weekend so far. The safety car undoubtedly ruined Ferrari's strategy. The Maranello team could have made better use of the medium tire in the second stint and stretched the stint enough to mount the softs at the end, which would have given them a performance advantage and potentially allowed them to challenge for the podium. The picture after the fourth race is starting to take shape. McLaren is the best, with Mercedes as the second force. Ferrari still needs to be figured out, but reacted well on an unfavorable track. Red Bull remains the big question mark, struggling even with Max Verstappen, as the problems with the RB21 are starting to show more clearly. Charles Leclerc explained that the strategy was the one they had planned, but he had imagined the race unfolding differently, especially in the opening laps. He had thought a one-stop strategy might have been possible. With the safety car, which obviously couldn't be predicted, the most logical option became two stops. He said they suffered a lot with degradation and were forced to fit hard tires, because with softs they would never have made it to the end. The Monegasque driver admitted that Mercedes had a more complete car in the Bahrain weekend, which allowed George Russell to be more daring. Ferrari has given everything, but unfortunately it once again is not enough. Until he ended up behind George Russell, the feeling with the car had been good. From that point on, however, the tires began to overheat, and he could no longer drive the way he wanted. Even the first stint was not bad, though the balance wasn't perfect. In the second, they had improved a bit, but with the hards they hadn't found the rhythm they were hoping for. Charles Leclerc said he hoped to return to fighting for the podium soon. Finishing fourth after giving everything was disappointing. He couldn't smile at the end of the day, even though he knew they did their utmost. But it was still not enough. Lewis Hamilton completed his best race since becoming a Ferrari driver, not counting the sprint race win, which remained his only real highlight so far. Fifth place certainly wouldn't thrill the Tifosi, but it did go some way toward dispelling the issues the Briton himself had acknowledged the day before. His dejection had been clear. The feeling with the SF25 still wasn't there, and there was a lot of work to do, especially as Charles Leclerc was managing to extract more performance at this stage, assuming the role of team leader. However, that second stint, during which Lewis Hamilton was as fast as his teammate in Bahrain, needs to become a starting point and provide the confidence that is currently lacking. Lewis Hamilton stated that overall, it had been a solid race. The seven-time Formula One world champion got off to a decent start, gained a few positions in the early phases, and felt competitive especially in the middle stint on mediums, during which he had also managed some good overtakes. The pace was strong, and he had been able to push while maintaining consistent lap times, something he hadn't managed in previous races. The Briton noted that the car balance had worsened slightly in the final laps on hards, but overall he was satisfied. He thanked the team, saying the strategy and pit stops had been executed perfectly and had made a real difference for him. They have gathered important data over the weekend and intended to approach Jeddah in the same way.